Good evening, guys. This is the Ace Perspective. It's been a while since I've posted a video. I've decided to change up a bit. I decided to have me in the video, and the reason why is because I want to call out Boris. And I think that Boris needs to see who's calling him out. And that's the reason why. You should always be judged by your peers. I'm not a keyboard warrior. I don't hide behind the keyboard shouting abuse. I like to tell it like it is. Now, I'm incensed because it's been a long year. It's 2021, start of a new year. And I thought, you know what, start off afresh. Let's get rid of COVID. I listened to Boris's press conference today, 8 p.m. 8 p.m. I was there, sitting there. I had the one TV on, watching Liverpool, and I had the other phone on BBC, listening to Boris. Now, Boris announced the worst kept secret in the UK. We're going into a full lockdown. No surprise. No surprise whatsoever. I'm involved in early years. I'm in that field in early years. So I was particularly interested in what Boris had to say. Now, bear in mind that Boris, having half a brain cell, and he's sharing that with the rest of his cabinet, only follows what Nicola Sturgeon says. I mean, it's historical. Last year, March the 23rd, he locked down schools and nurseries to only key worker children and vulnerable children. This was on the back of Nicola Sturgeon doing the same in Scotland. If you look at all the decisions made, Nicola Sturgeon, who's a real politician, a real prime minister, makes a decision. Boris waits a couple of hours or a day or so and then announces the same thing. Boris is like Father Christmas. He likes to give good news. He disappears. A few days later, he sends one of his cronies out. And I call them cronies because they're all a bunch of liars. And then they'll come out and they read the small print. It's generally bad news. So this was no different. Nicola Sturgis said Scotland's going to lockdown. Schools and nurseries are closing. Now I'm thinking, right, Boris, be true to form. Follow Nicola. Do the right thing. You already said that the COVID was 70% more infectious. It's worse than the first outbreak in March 2019. How can you do anything other than shut down the education system, online learning? Keep us all safe, Boris. Children, parents, staff alike. Well, Boris, being such a coward, decided what I'll do is I'll give good news on the back of bad news. So he made the announcement, I'm doing the right thing. I'm safeguarding the country and the staff. I'm closing schools. But all nurseries, childminders remain open. It took a while for it to sink in because I had to ring a few people and Google, and I thought maybe my ears was mistaken. Maybe maybe I had furlough or something. Maybe I had long COVID. I didn't understand. But that's what he said. He said that primary schools are closing throughout England, but nurseries remain open as usual. I'll ask you, and I'll ask anybody, how does that make any sense whatsoever? I'll let you think about that. You're closing primary schools. You're protecting the staff and parents because you believe that children are not really affected that badly. But you're leaving nurseries open as per normal. So, Boris, do you not think that nurseries are run by staff? And do you not think that children have parents in nurseries? The weird thing about it is that I speak to a lot of parents, obviously, and I speak to a lot of people, and nobody has seen any statistical evidence whatsoever. Boris has never asked me a question about it, and I'm in the earlier setting. We have asymptomatic children whose infected staff members, and our nursery had to close for 14 days. What makes you think this is going to be any different when it's 70% more infectious? Does Boris not think that these children at the nursery may have older siblings who are off school to protect them and their parents, who will then take COVID or the new variant into their homes and infect their parents, infect their grandparents and cousins, and COVID will spread that way? Not only that, is they then asking parents to leave their house to bring their child to nursery to get infected. I don't see any logic. I don't see, even for somebody with half a brain like Boris, how is that possible? The disappointing thing is that when Boris closed some primary schools in London and he said other primary schools will remain open, the teachers' union jumped up and said, we're not having that. Health and safety cannot be protected that way. We can't protect the staff. We'd rather sue you. Boris then turned around and closed the other half of the primary schools in London. Now, ask yourself a question. Why did he have to close the other primary schools? Was it because it was unsafe, or was it because they threatened him? Early years, I would imagine their unions aren't that powerful. So Boris decided to pick on early years by saying that they remain open. Doesn't make any sense. London is tier 4, and I'm only using London as an example. You cannot have part of London in lockdown, as he initially done, and the other half not. This was the argument. It's not safe because people travel around London, and this is what's happened now. He's now decided to appear to be strict, but give parents some good news by saying, oh, but nurseries are still open for you, so we're looking out for you. My opinion is he's going to wait a few days. He'll appear in another press conference saying that the infection rate is still going up and he's got to take more measures and he will close nurseries. He's a coward. Boris, you're a coward. You know you're a coward and you know what you've done. The sad thing about it is early years is not being supported enough, and that includes the local authority, because they're hanging us out to dry and they given the decisions on the nurseries, which is financially ruining them. Now, my personal opinion is, and I've spoken to parents, I say to them, if you can keep your kids at home, I understand fully why you would. Because in the first lockdown, we were told to only take preschoolers and leave everybody at home because of the social distancing rules. They're now asking us to take all children without social distancing rules and try and pretend that we're going to have lots of different bubbles. Well, if you've ever been to a nursery, it's quite small, there's only one bubble. You'd be lucky if you get 2 bubbles. You don't employ that many staff. It's not like a school. You haven't got the funding that schools have. And when you do have an infection outbreak, you have to close. We're being asked to go to work. We're being asked to take risks because the government hasn't got the balls, and it is right, haven't got the balls to turn around and do the right thing and say nurseries should close along with the primary schools. And that's the bottom line. But you have to remember, this is the same government who employs people like Dominic Cummings, the guy who was testing his eyesight on a 60-mile round trip on the motorway. And he was backed by Michael Groves, who then said that decision to drive to test his eyesight was valid. He agreed with him. Now, they've got new rules out, and I've been looking at the new rules that they've said about this new tier 4 with stricter measures, and about support bubbles and exercise. Now, Dominic Cummings tested his eyesight because he couldn't test his eyesight any other way than drive 60 miles. Now, they've said here that you should exercise close to home. Well, I'm going to test my legs. I think I could run a marathon, so I'm going to run 20 odd miles to test my legs. I mean, if it works for him, why can't it work for me? I mean, it's total madness, but people accept that. People accept that and they move on. The last thing I have to say is and this is the really confusing thing, if you think that the vaccine is the way out, then think again. It may be the way out long term, but don't think by any imagination it's the way out short term. And that's the very reason why they extended the furlough. Every time they extend the furlough, it tells everybody that they already know that we're in it for a long time, in it for the long run. Because when December was coming close, they introduced the furlough, or they extended it until April. They already knew what was coming. That was the clue. You don't get anything. You don't get nothing. You don't get anything for nothing. That's what I'm trying to say. You think about it, the vaccine, they've already changed the way they're going to use the vaccine. They came out and said what they've decided to do in their infinite wisdom, talking to the chief scientific officer. I don't know where he got his qualifications from, but we need to see some certificates. That they're going to spread the first dose as wide as possible. That was it. Spread as wide as possible. This should give you 70%, up to 70% immunity. But somebody asked a question in a really low voice and said, does that mean the person who's been vaccinated with the first dose couldn't walk around? And then the answer was no, because we don't know if that person who's been injected with the first dose of vaccine can still transmit COVID. So you have to say, how does that help with the lockdown? It makes no difference in that respect, because if they're not locked down, even if you've got the vaccine, you can still, or they don't know if you can still spread to somebody else. So wouldn't it be easier to have a proper lockdown to keep people in their houses so that you can reduce the rate of spread? But no, they decided, no, what they're going to do is they're going to do the first dose, wait, I think is it 5, 6, 7 weeks for the second dose, which is going to take longer now. They say they're doing 2 million doses a week. And I read somewhere that you need 80 million doses or 80 million people to allow us to go back to normal. So you can do the maths. 2 million a week, we need 80 million people injected. But they're going to need 2 doses. And there should be maybe a 5, 6, 7 weeks or 12 weeks between the doses. So you can imagine that nothing's going to happen for us until the summer. Why can't they just come out and say that? This is why people are falling into depression, because this seems to be a never-ending story when nobody ever tells the truth. Boris just can't come out and tell the truth, and none of his 12 idiot cabinet members. I mean, I don't want to start on this particular video, but I'll be calling out a few of them because they're all as bad as each other, but they're headed by Boris himself, Mr. Feel-Good Factor, Mr. Hype Man, disappears, the curtains draw, and then some guy comes out with a hammer and sickle, like the Grim Reaper, to give us all the bad news. And there you have it. That's basically the sort of England we're living at the moment now. I, for one, will happily have Nicola Sturgeon cross the border, kick Boris out of 10 Downing Street and do his job. At least you know she gives you it straight. And that's all the British public wants. You'd be surprised how people will lead their lives slightly differently, do the right thing, understand the mechanics of it, when you have somebody who just tells you like it is. And I, for one, cannot believe a word Boris says. And unfortunately, there's nobody in his cabinet that gives me any sense of faith. This was like the last straw. This was the last straw for me, in a sense. If you're saying, and you can look somebody in the eye and you can say primary schools are different than nurseries, then something must be wrong with you. You're in the same locality, you have the same parents, you're walking on the same street. The infection rate is 70% more infectious or contagious It's worse than the first lockdown, where nurseries were streamlined to only take a few kids that are going to school. But you're now saying, after all what you've been giving us, all the information you've been spilling out, that nurseries and childminders should operate as normal, then I don't know what to say. I'm speechless. So there you have it. That's my perspective. Please don't believe the hype. Do the right thing. Those parents whose children in the nursery, think very carefully, because it's no different if your child comes to nursery and gets infected. You would have to self-isolate. Members of your family would have to self-isolate at some point if they kept symptoms as well. It's like a never-ending circle. And again, like I said before, and I don't understand it. I just don't work it out. I mean, I'm not even hit the health and safety aspects for staff members, because again, you have safeguarding, you have health and safety. I mean, I'm an employment lawyer. I find it difficult to justify certain things. We have to make tough decisions, tell parents to stay away, reduce numbers, and if push comes to shove, as part of the risk assessment, some nurseries will have to close because there is too much risk. The risk is too high on staff, on parents. And this is my main problem. So this is why I'm calling Boris. Boris, you're an idiot. And I'll say it to your face. But I think that people should talk. They should pressurize him. The Early Year Alliance organization for nurseries, I know they've written to Gavin Williamson and some other person to meet. I think it's all very polite. I think this is a time that, they should be a little bit more, how can I say, aggressive. I do think there should be a union for early years. It's about time. I always believed that they seem to brush over early years. It was nice that Boris, for the first time, mentioned early years. He generally doesn't mention them, and then the government website then mentions them on the website. But it's a large organisation doing great things, preparing children for school, and it should be never overlooked. And Boris, I'm afraid, overlooks it all the time. So if you don't know, now you know. Good night.